These days, it's kind of hard to define the crossover class of car. It used to be that they took the best of a car and the best of some sort of utility vehicle and then chucked them all into one model. But thanks to things like four-door coupes and performance SUVs, those lines have become a little bit blurred. The Mazda CX-7, though, sticks to the original recipe. It's longer and higher than your regular station wagon, but the CX-7 is more like a car than an SUV. It doesn't have any mechanical bits to help you go through the mud, and it doesn't have any electronics governing ride height or throttle input. What it does have is a lot of style. To me, it's always been one of the best looking cars in its class, even though the styling is based on a ridiculous sounding concept called the Metropolitan Hawk. This car is definitely more city slicker than Wild Bird. It's had a few updates over the years, and it still is a good-looking car that gets attention. The styling updates are old news now, but the interesting thing is that this car seems to have the ability to remain fresh-looking. It's been around for a few years, and it still looks great, maybe because it was a little ahead of its time when it first arrived on the scene, and now the others are all catching up. It's not a big car, but its proportions are all spot on. Even the 17-inch wheels, which I would normally say are a little on the small side, look fine. Mazda have grafted the family face onto the CX-7, but it still looks good. Even the opaque rear lights manage a certain style. And believe it or not, the rear wing is actually functional. It helps improve front-end balance at high speed, although we wouldn't suggest that you test that out on your next holiday trip. Which admittedly will be difficult because of the decent reward you get every time you put your foot down. This is a 2.5-litre four-cylinder with 120 kilowatts and 205 newton meters. But this motor has got a benefit that almost no other test car of ours has had. And that benefit is mileage. Ordinarily, the cars we get have anything between 500 and 5,000 Ks on the clock when we test them, but this particular CX-7 has 16,000. Sure, the paintwork may not be in pristine condition, but the motor is properly run in, and that means it's been loosened up nicely. 120 kilowatts in a 1.6-ton body gives you some idea of how the CX-7 goes. It's not too bad off the line, but it gets very thrashy towards the red line. In-gear acceleration, not too bad, although it tends to drop a gear when you really have to get going. So overall, not exactly sporty, but not exactly a hippopotamus either. The CX-7 Dynamic is fitted with a 5-speed automatic, and the next model up, the Turbo Individual, has a 6-speed automatic. There's nothing remarkable about this transmission though. It behaves like a regular autobox with decent shifts and a manual mode. The most impressive thing about this car though is that it just never acts the way you think something this big should. You see its size when you walk up to it, and in the driver's seat you get a real sense of space, but all your interactions tell you you're driving something a lot smaller. I mean, the steering is sharper and feels better than you'd imagine, and it's not nearly as wallowy as you'd expect. The CX-7 may be a crossover, but it borrows more from the car side of the family than anything else. Another advantage of a high-mileage test car? A well-used interior. Here at RPM, we're always kind of carrying on about how beige interiors aren't the most practical, especially in family cars like the CX-7. But this one seems to have stood up quite well. Only the center console is showing marginal signs of abuse. As for the rest, well, you get Mazda's propensity for lots of big switches, but in a car this size, it kind of suits it more than their other models. I've complained about the steering wheel before, and it's still terrible. Too many switches in too many different places, controlling not very much at all. Despite that, the CX-7 manages an interior that's comfortable and easy to use. Electrically adjustable heated driver's seats make life a little more luxurious, and the standard features list includes all the usual stuff, but you won't get things like a sunroof or xenon lights for your 340,000 Rand. One thing Mazda have stayed away from is a third row of seats, which means you get a proper boot at the back and room for 5 in the front. There's no furniture gymnastics that converts the boot floor into 2 patches of foam for some unlucky passengers, and consequently, no need for any other kind of gymnastics to actually get into the 2 patches of foam. So they've stuck to the basics on the interior and kept to the original crossover recipe. Give it the size and functionality of a utility vehicle, but make it as easy to use as any car. When I first drove the CX-7 a few years ago, I was way impressed, but now I'm even more impressed, because despite the time that's elapsed and all the competition that's arrived on the scene, this is still one of the best cars in its class. The big Mazda does well with its fairly modest output, although it does get very noisy when you approach the top of the rev range. It's still stylish, it's as comfortable as it's ever been, and it offers a well-balanced package without the fake advantage of a third row of seats. If only Mazda would do something about that steering wheel.